There's another scene there on Capitol Hill. Let's bring in Senator Rand Paul of the great state of Kentucky. So, Senator Paul, the WHO being instructed by the G7, and we should point out the WHO is headquartered here in Geneva, to undertake a second review of the origins of COVID-19 and whether or not it came out of the laboratory. Didn't Einstein once say that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result?
Here's the problem. The WHO investigated this the first time. We suggested 3 people to send to China. They rejected all 3, and they accepted a guy named Peter Daszak, who was the one who funded the lab. So you can't have the people like Anthony Fauci or Peter Daszak, who were part of the funding mechanism to send these funds to Wuhan lab. You can't have them investigating themselves. They have a definite conflict of interest because if this pandemic started in a lab that the U.S. was funding, the people advocating for the funding obviously will have, culpability, at least moral culpability. So they can't be investigating themselves. The WHO did a terrible job the first time. There needs to be investigation, but I've been advocating for a congressional investigation. In the Senate, I've asked 2 committees that I'm on, Homeland Security and the Health Committee, the Health Labor and Pensions Committee, to investigate this. I haven't heard back from the Democrat chairman so far, but I think this should be investigated. I don't think it has to be partisan. We should all want to know how this pandemic started, but we should all want to know so we don't have this happen again with another lab leak of an even more dangerous virus.
The communique that came out of the G7 summit in Cornwall, England, talked tough about China in terms of wanting to get to the bottom of coronavirus. They had something to say about their human rights abuses. The Chinese Communist Party basically took a page out of Vladimir Putin's playbook and said, who cares what a handful of nations say? We're looking toward the G20 summit this fall. It's a much bigger group. Does the G7 have the heft to try to put the screws to China, particularly when countries like Germany are really, getting into bigger economic deals with China, where France is being invested into a much greater degree? I mean, the Chinese bought Club Med, for Pete's sake. So do they have the heft to be able to put the screws to China?
I think it's very difficult for any international body to make another country that doesn't want to listen behave. I do think, though, that the entire world was affected by this pandemic. Over 3.5 million people have died. The type of research that they were doing in China has even deadlier implications. One of the viruses they've been working on has a 15% mortality, which would be 15 times greater, over 50 million people dead. So yes, the whole world has a self-interest in making sure that China behaves, but the only way we'll get them to behave is with ostracism by the whole world. And I agree with President Trump. We should have gotten out of the WHO and say, we only get back in, you only get us money, we only get any of our money if there's a real honest-to-goodness investigation of where this virus came from.
Let me get you to weigh in on tomorrow's summit for a little bit, if I could. When he was leaving NATO, President Biden suggesting that Putin is a worthy adversary, dialing back his criticisms just a little bit. Also with a preview of tomorrow's summit saying he's not looking for conflict with Russia. Listen here, and then I'll get you to react on the other side.
I'm not looking for conflict with Russia, but that we will respond if Russia continues its harmful activities. And we will not fail to defend the transatlantic alliance or stand up for democratic values.
Is dialing back the best way to deal with Vladimir Putin, or should he go into that meeting tomorrow with his gloves off?
I think we're approaching a time period that's not too dissimilar than the Cold War. In the Cold War, Russia, the Soviet Union had all kinds of human rights abuses. We objected to it. We spoke out against it. And yet Reagan did at some point sit down with Gorbachev and talk about nuclear arms control. I think we have the same sort of scenario now. There's a great deal of evidence of poisoning of their opponents, of people being poisoned around the world by a Russian nerve agent, which, seems to have come from Russia. So the thing is we have all of those things. They all need to be condemned. But at the same time, we still need to have a conversation with both Russia and China over nuclear arms control. We need to make sure that the world is assured that we are not a believer in the first strike of other nations and that we are a civilized nation that wants to reduce nuclear arms. I think those are important no matter how bad the human rights records are of other countries, that we continue to have some dialogue.
Give me just a couple of seconds on this because we're just running short of time here, Senator Paul. Should there be a joint press conference tomorrow between the two leaders? Should President Biden get up there on stage with Putin and talk tough publicly?
You know, I think optics are important, and I don't know if I have the best advice on whether it should be joint or separate, but I think there are ways to make our case known, to condemn human rights abuses, but at the same time still be willing to have a dialogue with Russia and China. So it's a difficult and delicate dance, diplomacy, but the main thing is we cannot cut ourselves off and we cannot refuse to have dialogue. We still need to have open dialogue with both China and Russia.
Yeah, you don't just talk to your allies, you talk to your adversaries as well. Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.